Alright, my attempt at telling my birth story. So it was a Wednesday morning. I remember I'd done a park workout the night before and I'd actually gone to bed quite late. It was about midnight. So when I woke up at 4 o'clock the next morning, I was like, oh, 4 hours sleep, that's not great. I woke up with a little bit of lower back pain and what I thought was poo cramps. It was a little bit like a tummy ache or period pain, but I didn't actually think anything about period pain. So woke up, made myself a hot cacao. I remember drinking it, and Joshua was away for work at the time, so I messaged him knowing that he'd be getting up for work soon. I messaged him and he said, you should probably time your pains because it could be labour. And I was like, oh, I'm like 37 and 4. Hadn't actually considered that to be any signs of labour. Although I had been having some Braxton Hicks contractions, but that was more just like a tightening, hardening feeling of my stomach. It wasn't actually painful at all, and I didn't actually put 2 and 2 together as well. So anyway, I messaged him and he said, time the pains, use the app. So I decided to do that. By the time I went to the toilet, had my drink, got back in bed, and I was fairly uncomfortable. I remember tossing and turning and thinking I couldn't quite get comfortable. I was laying on side, and then I actually went onto sort of my hands and knees, had a little stretch because I thought my back was sore from the workout. So I was doing a few little stretches, then I was laying on the other side, and then I was able to fall back to sleep. And the timing in the contractions was only about, I don't know, they were 6 minutes apart or something like that. So I thought, oh no, this isn't labour. Went back to bed, woke up at 10 to 9, and I had the same sort of lower back discomfort, and my abdominal pain was sort of gone, but I still needed to go to the toilet again. So I went over my bowels again. So that's why I thought I did have an upset tummy. Made myself a Milo, I made myself some toast, and yeah, whilst I was eating my toast, walked outside to feed my dog, and with a big bump, I squatted down into a deep squat position. As soon as I got down, I heard a loud pop, and then when I stood up, I could feel waters trickling down my legs, and I was like, oh shit. Next day or two, I'm gonna meet my little Bambino. So I came back inside, messaged Josh. I rang Joshy, said my waters have just broken. He's like, holy shit. And then I rang my doula, Jessie. So it pretty much started after those 2 phone calls. I remember my contractions actually started pretty much straight away. So abdominal tightening and discomfort sort of continued. Had my heat pack, which I'd put on earlier to go back to bed. I had that, and I was walking around with that attached to my back. I ended up having that on pretty much the whole time until Joshy got home and he had to reheat it for me. Hey, little man. Oh, hey. Sleepyhead. Stretch. You're the best thing ever. So I put my heat pack on, pretty much stayed on the phone until Joshy got home, because he was about an hour away working down south, so he had to drive back up. And so by the time that he got back, we spoke on the phones the whole time. He was reminding me about my hypnobirthing breathing, and I spoke to Jessie, my doula. She said, wear a pad so that you can keep track of how much fluid you're losing. So by the time I got inside, I put a pad on, and I'd noticed straight away the mucus plug, but I also noticed there was sort of a mustard tinge to it, which in the back of my mind I thought, uh-oh, I have a feeling that's meconium. And Jessie said, take a photo, send it to me. Yeah, it does look like meconium. Hey, what's up? You don't want me to talk about it, do you? The meconium was a little bit of a spanner in the works, and I was already feeling a little bit shaken by the fact that I was going into labour at 37, just over 37 weeks, but I was also, as soon as I saw a little bit of blood and then the meconium, I sort of went into a little bit of shock. And I remember I felt like all clammy and cool, and I was like, okay, I need to lay down on the bed. When I realised I couldn't actually lay down on the bed because it was too uncomfortable, I just had to keep sort of more upright. I was leant forward over the edge of the bed. Got a little blanket box at the end of the bed, and I was kneeling on that and leaning on the bed as well. Anyway, the hour that it took Joshua to get home, which was record timing, I think it was like 50 minutes. By the time he got here, he needed to help me pack the rest of my hospital bag because all the things that could be packed were packed. But it was like toiletries. I think I'd bought some new undies the day before that had been on the wash, so they were out on the line. So I was pretty much prepared. But anyway, Joshy had to make us scramble and finish packing the bags, as well as put the TENS machine on my back. So I had it there ready to go, but one, couldn't actually put it on myself, but two, the intensity of the contractions were starting to ramp up already. I was really just trying to stay comfortable. 10:20 he arrived. I didn't call the hospital until about 11:30, so it was just over an hour or so. He was doing some light touch, which, because the TENS machine was on my back, it kind of felt like back tickles, so it actually felt better for him to do some stroking around my belly. And I had a whole lot of pressure at the front of my pelvis, so right on my pubic bone. So he was doing a little bit of relieving of the pressure there for me too. And meanwhile, I had my birth playlist playing. Joshua was coaching me through the breathing techniques that we'd learned at hypnobirthing, and he was saying a few little funny things, but also a few little sweet things as well, reminding me about what we'd done. And the funny things, I remember in my head I was laughing. Well, it wasn't funny at the time. It was just like, I'm completely giving nothing here. I'm in complete silence. So the contractions started to ramp up quite quickly, and I remember the time I said go to the hospital, like within the first 2 or 3 contractions, but Joshy wasn't home yet, so I was really holding out till he got home. By the time it took him to pack the bags, coming in and out between the contractions, I was like, I think we need to head to the hospital. All right, I'm gonna call Jessie, and then I'm gonna call hospital, I think.
Yeah.
We'll be close together.
Yeah. I'm going a little pee.
Yeah. So I'd spoken with my doula again. So Jessie rocked around, I think it was about 12:15. And when she was there, Joshy was, he wasn't frantic, but he was like rushing around trying to pack everything. She came in and she sort of had lovely light touch and brought me back to my zone where I was breathing, able to relax. Oh, oh, belly. Oh.
Doing all right for me.
I remember we tried a little bit of hip pressure that actually increased the pressure around the front of the pelvis. I was feeling a lot of it right at the front. I remember I could feel my baby moving, like I could feel the actual movement down. I was in a bit of a hurry, everything was moving very quickly. And Joshy could feel that too, which was quite cool. Yeah, Jessie coming really sort of reset me back into my relaxed state. Getting to my bedroom to the front of the house, which is probably no more than 10 meters, it literally took 10 minutes because I had 3 contractions along the way. So those stopped me in my tracks. I remember standing up and I could only brace by holding on to either Jessie or Joshy to keep me on my feet, it was quite uncomfortable. When I got to the car, I realized there was no way I could sit down. I decided to kneel on the ground and then had my elbows on the seat. And then I remember I was pushing my top of my head into the seat, the backrest of the seat. And for the first time, it actually felt like there was no pressure on my legs, because by then I was already starting to fatigue. It had only been a few hours, but my legs, probably from the DOMs of my workout the day before, that didn't help. It was meant to be my rest day, but that didn't happen. So my legs were really fatigued, and just that taking that pressure off using my head, I remember my shoulders and my legs could just fully relax. So it took us only 7 minutes to get to the hospital. I only had 2 contractions in that time. By the time that we got there, there was a staff member that said, yeah, we'll get you a wheelchair. And when they realized how well into labor I was, said to Josh, you're going to have to push her. If her waters have broken, you know, it's not our responsibility. So that was interesting. I remember I had like an eye mask on, Josh's bathrobe on. So I was completely like, I didn't see anything from the car in the driveway at home until I got onto the bed in the birthing suite, which we ended up going to the birthing suite first, then we had to go back to the assessment unit and then go back to the birthing suite. But Joshy wheeled me up on the wheelchair. Again, I couldn't sit down, so I was knelt on the chair, arms on the back, with my eye mask on, with my robe on. Funnily enough, I didn't even get admitted because they realized how far I was into labor that I actually didn't even get a wristband. Like, yeah, so we got to the assessment unit. The lady wanted me to lay on my back on the bed. The midwife said, I need to check how far dilated you are. I didn't want a vaginal exam. Sort of persuaded and said that that was the way that I needed to be assessed to be admitted, and it was quite obvious that I was well into labour by then. I'm pretty sure I had 1 or 2 contractions whilst in the room. It was quite vocal. Had the TENS machine on still all the way until little Jasper came out. Vaginal exam, I said I can kneel on the bed with my hands on the back of, there's no way I can lay on my back, so we compromised. Now I didn't want to know what my dilation was, more just like a mental thing, because I know that you can be however many centimeters and then take a long time to progress, or could be not very many centimeters and then that could be a letdown thinking of how far along you are. So I just didn't want to know, but my doula, they told my doula, and obviously the rest of the team. Joshie and Jessie parked sort of illegally in the drop-off bay. They're like, no, don't go move your car. Don't go anywhere. I was like, oh, I must be close. So in amongst all of that, the team knew that I had meconium in my waters. From then on, it was pretty much emergency situation. Like I could feel the urgency starting to build around me. I couldn't hear Joshie and Jessie for a little bit, and I honestly thought I was going to theatre for a cesarean. Like I had a split second thought that I was just like, where have they all gone? Like I'm on my own, heading off to theatre, but no, they were being transferred into a room. They weren't far behind me. By the time we got into the room, midwife came in and said, we need to do some, monitor the baby. The heart rate wasn't very traceable with the external monitoring in my position of comfort, which was still on all fours, on my hands and knees, but sort of propped. Another midwife came in and said, I'm the big bossy midwife and you need to get on the bed and lay on your back. We need to get a trace of your baby's heart rate. So they had to use a fetal scalp electrode, which essentially is inserted into the vagina and then screwed into the baby's head, which I'd learnt about beforehand and I really didn't want, but obviously the situation permitted. I was still having my contractions then, quite strong too, and they said, we need to get your baby out in the next 15 minutes. And knowing full well that a normal pushing stage could be between half an hour and a couple of hours, they said we need to use the vacuum, and I really didn't want any instrumental delivery, particularly for the risk of the perineal trauma. But again, the situation permitted, so accepted the vacuum, and I definitely preferred the vacuum over the forceps. And I remember the obstetrician looking up at me and she said, episiotomy? And I was like, no, hard no. That was a hell no from me. With the vacuum, I think they allowed me to have 1 contraction with 2 or 3 pushes. Then they used the vacuum for the next 2 pushes, so it was out in 3 contractions. I did not picture myself to be laying flat on my back. My legs were up in stirrups and having the vacuum extraction, but it was quite remarkable. Once I had pushed his head out, they told me to stop and slow down because they wanted to allow my perineum to stretch. And I remember that was when it started to get quite uncomfortable. So up until then, everything was pretty intense, but the pain was manageable. I didn't really need anything other than the TENS machine until then. I remember at that time, once his head was out and was sort of just hanging there in limbo, I could start to feel discomfort. So they offered me the gas, which I remember having, pushing the body out. And once he was born, they lifted him up, popped him on my tummy. And I remember as soon as he was on my tummy, sort of that relief, and opened up his little legs, and I got to announce that it was a boy. But Joshy tells me afterwards, everyone already knew. By now, I think there was felt like there was probably 10 or so people. Joshy even told me the pediatrician had come in at one stage. Yeah, there was a lot of medical staff at that time, which made me realize how much more urgent it was having meconium in my waters. His head was out, and then the body came out. There was a massive gush of waters after that. So yeah, everyone got a bit splashed, and I remember it was like halfway up the bed as well. It was messy. Birth is definitely messy. Yeah, once he was delivered, I remember saying straight away, is there any damage to my perineum? And the doctor was like, nope, your perineum's intact, but you have bilateral tearing of your labia. You've pretty much torn your flaps. Not external, it's more internal, which was possibly from the vacuum or him moving quite quickly. And then afterwards, I did want to pass my placenta naturally, but because of the meconium, he had to have his cord cut immediately, which again, I wasn't very happy about, but that was the situation. I ended up having a big postpartum bleed. So after my placenta was managed, they were pushing on my tummy, I had to pass my placenta, and I ended up having sort of trickling of blood, which they guesstimated to be about 1.2 litres of blood loss. So I ended up having to be hooked up to a Syntocin drip after all that, because I did initially decline the Syntocin injection straight after birth. In the meantime, I ended up having the suturing, which I used the gas for. That was actually more painful than the birth itself. And in that time, Jasper's temp had dropped a little, so he had to come off me. I think it was probably a good hour that we had skin to skin. He had to come off me and then be under the heat lamp. So by the time I had a shower, with the help of Jessie, I came back out and my little guy was all wrapped up in Joshy's arms. So it was a pretty special moment. You reckon? Yeah? I love you.